Hey folks, Kevin here. Got another video for y'all to check out. I've been working on this little tool called Chester, and it helps you run WebDriver IO tests. You can change what kind of specs you want to run, turn off certain capabilities, and just run specific tests. And you can override environment variables and everything. And if you hit run tests, it will actually send you this output down here. I don't have my Selenium server running, so I get a connection refused error. Anyway, one thing I was doing in this little spec files, I kind of like this, but there's actually a different way I'd like to select tests based on folders. And if you look here, I'm using this iView UI component library, and this I feel like would be a better way to select tests. And it expects you to pass in a format that looks like this. So you'll have the title here, parent1 matches to parent1, expand true to whether it starts expanded or not. But what I like about this is from a UI perspective, it's a lot easier to narrow down to a single folder. Like you could deselect all and then select that, compared to this format, which is it's not separated by folders. So I wanted to convert to that. I go to my spec files function. You can see I get all of the specs, actually the specs property from the config, and then I break that out. Actually, I add the project path, some stuff, and then use config parser, which is part of the WebDriver IO core library, call a get specs function on it that will actually return to me an array of specs over here. That's going to be just a list of each of my test files that I want to run. So what I want to do is basically convert that over to this new format that groups each of my files by the folder that they're located in. And so that's a little bit of code, and I think it would be a really great opportunity to write some unit tests for. Now, normally to write unit tests, I'd use a framework like Mocha or Jasmine, but this is kind of a pet project, and I don't really have that set up or anything. So what I ended up doing, I wrote my component, which is called spec files, which comes into here and does a whole bunch of stuff. You can see I've got this commented out. This is that tree view. Right now I've got that select in there. So what I ended up doing is I have this grow tree function and this create tree function. And the grow tree is a recursive function that kind of digs deeper into the file tree and will produce that array for me. So I have it in here, and I didn't really know how to get this set up through Mocha and requiring it through Vue.js and the whole package and everything. So I ended up writing this code, and it's got a little bit of logic in it. It's got some conditionals, the file recursion, and then a little bit of processing. So it's a little bit more logic than something like set specs, which just calls commit. Like it does a single check and then calls commit on it, or even find files. It'll just do some basic functionality. This is a little bit more complicated, and so that's why I think it would be great for a unit test. Anyway, what I'm trying to get at is I wanted to unit test this function and this function, but didn't want to have to set up a unit test framework in this Vue project. I'd really like to just unit test just this function in kind of an ad hoc or very informal way. So I'm going to walk through kind of what I did to make that happen. So the first thing I did was I wanted to pull out these two functions into their own file. So the way this works is when we click the button. So if I come back over here and I refresh the page, I can't refresh it because this is not in dev mode. If I go to another one, when I click this button, that's going to call show files and go into here, which is going to call find files, and go into here, which is going to call this .create tree, which will create that tree for me that gets passed in to my tree view. Now I'm not actually using this right now because I need to work on the UI of that tree view, but that's how that all works. When I first wanted to move this to its own file, and the idea of moving it to its own file is so that it's easier for me to load into my test file. What I realized is that I'm setting my state here to this.tree specs, but this is like purely functional code, whereas over here is kind of integration code, integrating different pieces. So the first thing that I should do is not do this bit of stupidity. I should just return that, return a tree, and then up here I should do this dot tree specs is equal to this dot create tree, this dot specs, blah, blah, blah. And I'm gonna confess this is not the prettiest code. I'm kind of just throwing this all together, but I just want it to work right now. So the benefit of doing this is it does really separate out kind of functional logical code with integration code, which is good. It helps with making testing easier because I don't have to pass in this object. I can just do plain input output. So with that, I can go ahead and copy that out, and I will create a new file over here. I'm gonna do just a plain module.exports is equal to grow tree and create tree. I'm going to move that up here. And then I'm going to export the grow tree function and the create tree function. I actually don't need to export the grow tree function. I could just do create tree, but I'll just do it for the sake of it. And then I need to also, let's set the syntax to JavaScript, make it a little bit prettier. And then I'll do a function, fix the indentation, get rid of the commas because it's not in an object anymore. And that's pretty good. I can go ahead and save this file. I've got a whole bunch of different ones in here. I'm gonna call this, let's just call it tree.js, just for the fun of it. Okay, so this is my tree file. I'm going to come up here and now I need to import it. So I'm gonna import my create tree function from /tree.js and then update this call to just be this.createTree because that gets pulled in from that import statement. And if I save this, it should still work. Let me go ahead and bring up my dev branch or my dev version. And of course I had a lint error in tree. I need to require path. So I'm going to just copy it from over here. And because this is going to be required from a just plain node module, not a Webpack config, I'm going to change that over to the node module management system. Okay, so now I have my dev version working. So if I come over here and I click there, I do have an error. This.growTree is not a function. Yeah, so in my tree, I'm referencing this.growTree. Well, it's not that anymore. It's just growTree. So I need to update that, fix that. And okay, so now it ran without any errors. I don't actually know if it worked or not, but it ran without any errors. So now I've got my tree moved over and required from here. Now I can get to actually writing a unit test. One thing I'm gonna use for my unit test is Node's Assert library. This is a built-in API that's available in Node. All you have to do is require it. So I will come up to, this is gonna be my new test. Set the syntax to JavaScript so we can get a little bit of colorfulness in because the colors help so much. Anyway, so yeah, we'll require it and we can even, let's go ahead and require our tree. So I'll just do create tree, kind of like I did in my module. And now I need to save this. I'm gonna save it in here just under test.js. This way I can kind of differentiate between my JavaScript files and my test files. Okay, so I've got that. Now I can write a basic assertion. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna check that create tree is a function. I like using the variable name actual and then say assert actual is equal to, and then my expected is gonna be function. So I'll do type of create tree. So this is going to get the type of whatever create tree is, which I'm expecting it to be a function. And I can actually add an error message. So I'll say expected. So this is a little bit of a nicer error message here. So I'll run that. And then if this doesn't throw an error, then it's going to move to the next line and I'll just say test passed. So if I come in here, I save that and then I go back to my terminal. I'll open a new tab and I'm going to run node source and I'm going to go all the way down this chain and do tree.test.js. Let's see how that runs. Okay, so the test passed. Let's see if we can get it to fail, and I'll just do that by deleting the exports function. Now if I run, You see it expected undefined to be a function. Cool. So it is a function and it fails. And that's like my first unit test right there, is just checking that it's a function. Now I could keep writing some more unit test here. So like copy that. And then I could check that when I call create tree, actual is an array. If we look back over here, it is an array that is being returned. It has objects inside of it, but the whole thing is an array. And if I pass nothing, then it should at least return an array, because that's the first thing it creates. I could say, I think array.isArray is the latest way to check that it's an array. So let's save that. Actual has already been defined. Of course it has. I guess I could do like actual to. Yeah, we're gonna see why this is not good. So files.forEach is not a function because I was supposed to pass this in as an array. Try that. Okay, so now I've got 2 tests passed. So what if I just like returned an object? Let's try that. There. Now I've got my assertion error, expected create tree to return an array. These are some really basic tests. They feel a little verbose and unnecessary, but they can be really helpful when you're writing out your architecture to kind of get a basic understanding of how you want everything to flow together. Okay, so I could keep doing this, but there's a couple problems. You see, like I have to create a new variable name every time this console test passed. It's kind of annoying. I don't really know which test passed in that instance. There's got to be a better way. In the spirit of JavaScript, I'm going to turn these tests into an object, because everything in JavaScript is an object. In that object, I'm going to name my test. So here, I'm going to use the property to name my test. So I'll say create tree should be a function. And then inside of here, I'm going to define my test. And then I'll hit a comma and do another one. And now I don't have to do array, or I don't have to do actual 2, actual 3, actual whatever. I can just kind of keep reusing this variable name. Now it's not actually going to run my test. So I could call it directly by doing some really silly stuff here, and then the same thing here. But this is verbose and dumb, and there's a better way. And the way to do that is to use object.keys and pass in my test. This is going to convert my object into an array of strings based on their property name. Since it's an array, I can use forEach to loop through it. So I'll take my test, I'll call it test name, to be a little bit clear on what's going on. I'll use this short or fat arrow syntax. So I'll take my test name and I'm going to call test name, kind of similar to what I was doing in that one example. I'll call it, and then if that runs without an error, I'll log out that passed, and then I'll pass in the test name. And if you're wondering about this syntax of the $ brace and these backticks, this is JavaScript template string literals. I think they're just string literals. I don't think they're template string literals, but they're a nicer way of writing out strings without having to do like the plus and all that kind of nonsense. So if you haven't checked that out, it's a really neat little thing. So now if I save this and come back, let's see if I messed things up. Object.key is not a function. Oh yeah, it's not object.keys, or not object.key, it's object.keys. There we go. So now they both passed, and if I make the first one fail, so I'll just do it like that, now I get an assertion error still coming out from here. But it didn't actually run my second test, so I don't even know if that second test failed or not. That's the next item that we can add to this, which is to say, if this test fails, I want to handle it a little bit better than spitting out this assertion error on assert.js line 42. Like, that tells me nothing. I do like that it's on line 42 though, but then I have to go into here and all sorts of stuff. We have like this really nice passed message. Let's try and create a really nice failure message. To do that, I'm going to use a try catch block. So try catch blocks are great for functions that you aren't sure are going to throw an error or not. Like they're useful for like network requests because those most of the time work, but sometimes they'll completely blow up. Or for writing unit tests, because most of the time these are going to work, but sometimes they break, and when they do break, I want to handle them. So if this call fails, it's going to throw an error. It's going to catch that error in here and let me handle it independently. So I can do something like customize this error message. I'll use console.error and I'll say it failed. I'll put my test name in there and then a dash, and then I'll put that e-message in there. So there's a message property on my error. And then I'm actually not going to throw an error. I'm not going to stop the program from running. That way it can run it can run through all the tests. So I'll convert this back over to a failing test and then run again. And so you can see it failed here. It told me which test it was running and then what happened. Expected function to be a function. Well, of course, that's not a good error message because I've changed my test. So it's actually, this is a lie right here. This is lying to you and me. But anyway, the whole point is that it tells me that it failed, and then it went ahead and kept running the test. But if you notice this little X sign here, this is in my terminal. It's set up to do that if the command that was run returns an exit code or exit status, which is what Wikipedia calls it, exit status. But basically, there's these little numeric codes that tell a process, a parent process, whether child process exited successfully or not. And in Node, it normally exits with a 0 status code, but when we throw an error, it's going to exit with a 1, and then there's a whole bunch of other different codes out there. If we exit with a code of 1 or more, it's going to tell my terminal that and give me this little X so that I know that something bad happened. But it's also really useful in like build systems to tell the build, hey, go ahead and stop building because test failed. You'll see this with like a linting. It'll stop trying to compile your code if your linter didn't pass, and then you can go work on it right away. So we kind of want to bring that back in. Thankfully in Node, there is a process.exit command, which allows you to exit the Node process with a specific code. When the program runs fine and you don't have any sort of exit code or process.exit at the end, it'll just return a 0, but we can manually call it if we want to. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to say let exit code equals 0. So we're going to default saying that all our tests passed. If we do get into this catch situation, I'm going to change that to a 1. And then at the end, I'll do process.exit exit code. So now if I come back here and run my test, you can see I've got that little X mark back because a test failed. And if I changed it, it would go away. That's cool, but what about us humans? Like I can kind of see that, but it's not the brightest. Like I want it to like shine, glimmer, really pop. I need it to pop. That's what I need it to do. So what I can do is there's some pretty cool NPM packages, but I don't want to really have to install a dependency just to make it just for like a single line of code. So what those packages do are they use these things called escape sequences. Is that what they're called? Yeah, I think they're called escape sequences. And they just change certain parts of the color. So there's this escape sequence called bright that we can set. So I'm going to take that and if I add that into my error message, it looks kind of funny, but it's actually going to make my text bright right there. So if I run that again, well, now it made both my text bright. And the reason for that is that this sticks around after this single error. It's still going to remain bright. So we need to reset it. So I'll use this reset reference. And at the end, I'll just reset it. So now, if I run, you can see it's brightened this up, and then this is kind of gray. Okay, so I added a whole bunch of new unit tests in here. Didn't want to take too much time trying to write all this out, but you can see I've passing in a value and then expecting a value and doing some deep equals on it and different values and such. And it gets kind of verbose here, but if I run this, let's see. I actually do have a couple of failures in my test or in my code that I never checked for. In this one, if I pass it without a / at the beginning, it actually doesn't return the right value. And I think that has something to do with this file.split maybe. Yeah, basically if there's no separator in there, this is a single item array. And so to fix that, I just need to add a little bit of a conditional in there. Oh. That totally broke. Oh yeah, that's because I need to delete that. Run that again. Oh, more failures. Oh, it's because this checked only checks the first item, and I need it to check all of them. Ooh, these are a lot of failures. Expected function. Oh, that one is because I forgot to undo that change. Try that again. It's a little bit better. Oh, that needs to be let nodes instead of constant nodes. Maybe that was the issue. Oh yeah, that was the issue. I forgot to change that over to a let, that way I can update that. Those things matter. And now I have them all passing. And so that was pretty cool just to get this little bit of unit testing working outside of any sort of framework. I just kind of compiled all my tests in here together and made a mini test runner right here that'll just run through my test and passed and failed and all that sort of thing. Then I just run it through Node. And if I really wanted to, I could like come into my package JSON down here. And I actually already have, this is a boilerplate framework that came with it. And so it actually already has like this karma setup that I could have used, but I really wanted to try this out. But I could add like a check command in here. You could use test if you don't already have test, and then I'll run it. And so if I run npm run check, you see it runs that test. So I could run multiple different tests if I wanted to. Yeah. So that's what I just wanted to show, is this idea of kind of ad hoc unit testing, how test frameworks are kind of built out with assertions, and that assertions throw errors, and that test runners basically call your function inside of a try catch block and do all sorts of stuff. Of course, they do a lot more complicated things than this does, but it's not that difficult to write a basic one and get it working. So I've actually got a blog post out that I will link to if you want to read in detail kind of how this is all set up. I also posted some sample code if you wanted to play around with some sample code. So let me know what you think about this idea and if this video helped at all. Thanks.